right, so we have a navigation from the login page and to the home page. That's good. We should also revisit these links that we have here: the login link, the register link, all those links. All right. So let's revisit those. Right now, the home page has those links hard-coded. Right. They are navigating to hard-coded documents that actually don't exist anymore, right? Because we've moved them around, right? So these links are broken. So for the home page, what we're going to do is going to say this is the home page will be mapped to the root, right? Slash the login, right? Instead of being hard coded to an actual document, it's going to be now mapped to an intent, right? Where is it that we want to? Our intention is to navigate to the login, but it is not our responsibility to actually navigate to the login, right? It's a centralized control which will handle that. Same thing here, right? Register. I don't really know where those documents are, right? Somebody might move them around. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm not broken, right? Because I don't know where they are, right? It's not my responsibility to know where these things are. All right, so let's see to the profile. Okay. Right? So that if I refresh this and I click on login, I'm navigating to the login page, but without actually leaving the index page. You see that? Right? All right. So how about the register page? If I go back and click on the register page, let's see. If I click on the register page, notice that there's nothing mapped to the register page. So let's map something to the register page. Let's go back and configure that over here. We'll configure it and say, let's see, we'll say that dot when you see register, right? I would like to display the template URL, and this will be views. Where is it? Where do we put it? There it is, right? Register. And we'll need to change the name for that, but I'll let you do that for the assignment. So this is templates, and this is register.html, right? And we have yet another one, profile. If we go into the profile, this is profile.html. Okay, so let's refresh. And indeed, it's showing the register page, right? Or if I click on profile, it navigates to the profile page, the same pages that we had earlier. Yes?
So I think I'm a little confused about how it actually works. So, when you click on href, does the browser try to ask the server for this profile and it doesn't get anything, or does JavaScript stop it?
Yeah, right. So what happens is that so just like we can in JavaScript, we can configure an event handler to handle a button, right? You can say on click, right, and then associate a function with an on click. You can also associate an event handler on hash changed, right? So Angular wraps this and says, hey, browser, inform me, let me know when the hash has changed, right? And the browser says, sure, here it is. The hash just changed. Here is its brand new value. And what Angular does is that it returns null. And when you return null from an event handler, you're basically saying don't do the default behavior, meaning don't look for an anchor, don't try to scroll looking for this anchor. The anchor doesn't exist, right? So what Angular does is that it listens for these over here, right? And it has been configured to do different things for different hashes, right? And the configuration says that if the hash ends with login, then it should load this HTML and inject it into that ng view. It's as simple as that.
And so what happens when you refresh if it has a hash on it?
Yeah, no, it loads it.
But
just
how does it know? Isn't the server wouldn't the browser just be looking for that entire URL?
the server?
Yeah.
The server ignores the hash.
Oh.
Yeah, the server ignores the hash, right? It only gives you the index.html, right? When it gets to the browser then looks at this, right? And then it scrolls down would want to scroll down to where the anchor profile is, right? But before it gets to do that, Angular has already declared an event handler that says, hey, don't do that. Instead, notify me. because I have all these cool behaviors associated to those changes in that hash. Make sense? Right. So it's hijacking this behavior that has been around for for ages, right? Since the inception of the World Wide Web. Yes, right. It hijacks that mechanism, and the nice thing is that it works just fine with back and forth with the buttons, because changes in the hash also participate in the browser history, right? So you can just go back in the history of all your hashes. Okay, so the back buttons and forward buttons work just as well. Let's see, we have some errors, and that's because the profile and the register page are still full-fledged HTML documents, right? They're all of them. They're trying to load all these bootstrap and styles, which they don't need to anymore, right? The parent index is doing that already, right? So they don't need to reload all those common things, right? So let's fix them. Let's go to the profile page, and we're going to demote this. I'm going to say, oops, and we're going to say that you no longer are a full-fledged HTML document. You are instead a snippet of an HTML document. Yes?
I have a question about using scope in the controller. I was trying to recreate what you did last class about having it show up alert. Just not the alert. It's like so
yeah.
I tried to do that, but I got the alert will show up no matter what.
Okay. All right.
I looked at the app.js in the test you gave us for testing the database in the first assignment.
Yep.
You don't use scope at all in that one.
Yeah, we're going to remove scope today. Yeah, we're going to do that in a minute. Yeah, we're not going to use scope ever again for the remainder of the semester. And I need to explain why. Okay? Where was I? Right, so we are reworking, right? We are refactoring these so that these no longer need to be full-fledged HTML documents. Instead, they are just snippets of HTML documents. Oops. Right, because all this bootstrap and styles are already loaded. We don't need body anymore. Right? These are just little small components, snippets of HTML. Right now they are fairly big HTML documents, right? That are meant to be rendering an entire page. Yes? But eventually, as we go further in here, especially when we get to the widgets, right, each individual widget will be its own little HTML document, right? Some will render images, some will render iframes for YouTube, right? Some will render something as simple as an H1, H2, H3. And those are meant to be reusable components, right, that you can then load, right, and then inject into the content strategically to paint the entire page. Yes? Right now, our views are fairly big views, right? They are meant to represent an entire page, right? But as we progress, they'll become their scopes will be narrower, right? So let's see if this still works. If I go back, if I go to the register page, let's see if that works. If I click on register, that works. Yes? Right. What about clicking on register? That doesn't seem to work, right? Because one wants to go to a website list, or clicking on cancel, he wants to go to the actual login page. Yes? Right? We want to fix that. So if you go to the register page, we are no longer going to literally refer to a physical page. Instead, we are going to notify the central controller of the intent of the user, right? Generate an event that the user wants to do this. Also here, for now, let's navigate to the profile for now, right? If we click on register, let's see what else on the login. Let's fix here any links that we might have. Instead of navigating to the register page, we are going to navigate to register. Okay. What about the profile? The profile, we're replacing all these hyperlinks so that they don't refer to these these documents anymore, right? Instead, we are leaving it up to the controller to decide where do we go from here. So let's see if this works. If I click on cancel, navigates to login. Yes. Yes.
the JavaScript perspective?
Yep.
Or if this is set page?
No. So we would provide another mapping file that would say all these URLs that you see. These are all dynamic. Here are the static versions of these pages, so that for you to parse, right, and to index, right.
So is that just for Google or everyone needs to have
Well, now all search engines
well, when
are supporting this.
like when a client reaches your site, do they have to download all those static?
No. Yeah, no. This is only strictly for search engines. Yeah, right. They follow these. Just like we click here, our search engine would do the same thing, right? We want to follow this link, right? We would follow this link, and what they would find here is an empty content, right? They would only find just an empty view, ng view. There's nothing for it to index. Somebody, yes.
So does that mean we have to like basically do everything twice, or is it like
For indexing, yes. I mean, there are tools that would automatically do this, right? We'd compile all this into static content, right? But that's not what the user would be interacting with, right? Only Spider would be interacting with that. Yes.
So you want to compile it and just store them somewhere in the server?
Yep.
What if your website changes and you want to
You need to recompile it.
compile it?
Yep. Right. You need to provide static, and you can decide what is it that, for instance, for a search engine, you won't need to have any of the styling. You won't need to have any of the images. You don't need to have any of that, right? So you can do more, search engine optimization on that content, right? Because you're not going to have any ads, none of that, right? It's going to be explicitly only the content that you want for them to index, right? And you can do lots and lots of optimization when you don't have any of this additional content that you need to show, right? All right, so let's continue. So looks like the navigation works, right? We're navigating, but here when we are clicking on login, right? If we click and successfully log in with a real user, we don't want to just stay here with this helpful message from the controller. We actually want to navigate to where we need to go. Okay, so let's work on that. Right? Let's revisit the controller. Right, so in the controller for the login page, let's go in there. Right, in the controller, user controller, there it is, the login. What we want to do is that we want to programmatically navigate to the profile page if it's successful, right? If we find the user that we were looking for. Okay, so basically we want to do this programmatic. We want to go to the profile, right, and go to the profile page if we were successful, right? So to do that, there is a library to do that, right? There is a service called the location service. The location service allows us to programmatically decide where do we want to navigate, right? Without actually knowing where those documents are. Right? Again, it's an abstraction. We don't want to know where these physical things are, right? That is configured in a single place once and never again, right? In here, these are the configurations of where we would like to go. So where do we want to go? To a profile. So what location allows us to do is if found, for instance, we will allow it to go to, we would like to be able to do something like location, go to the following URL. But not the URL, the physical URL, right? Not actual documents, right? Instead, it's these higher level URLs, right? That have meanings that have been mapped to some physical content. Okay, see that? All right, this is going to allow us to navigate to the profile page. So let's do that. So that if we refresh, if I give something bogus, this still works. But if I give Bob and Bob, right, I now navigate to the profile page and the URL having changed. Everybody okay? All right. All right. All right. Before I continue, let's make some cleanup here. Right. So So this scope here, right, is somewhat of a problem, right? Now, in this simple application that we have right now, it's not an issue, right? But as this grows and becomes more complicated, and you have views that might be inside of other views, for instance, in the widget list, when you get to the widget list, you're going to have an outer view, right, that will render maybe a header, maybe the footer, it's going to render some title, okay, and it's going to iterate, right, over an array of widgets, correct? And as it iterates over the widgets, it's going to include views, right, that will have their own controllers, okay? Some views will render an iframe for the YouTube video, another widget will render raw HTML, another widget will render an image, and so on and so forth, right? Each one with its own controller, okay? So you're going to have a view within a view, and it could be any number of nestings that you might want, right? You might have views with its own controller, and then controllers within controllers within controllers, right? And when you start doing that, this scope starts to have an issue, right? A maintenance issue, right? Scope behaves like any scope that you might be familiar with, right? Typically, when you have a piece of data associated to a scope, right? You can find that variable in that scope, right? So typically in JavaScript and other programming languages, we can create scopes with these curly brackets, right? We have curly bracket, and then inside you can have another curly bracket, and then inside of the curly bracket, right? Every time you declare a narrower scope, right, you can declare local variables in that narrower scope, correct? Right? But in that narrower scope, you have access to variables that have been declared at a higher scope, correct? Right? So inside of a narrower scope, like maybe inside of an if statement or for loop, right, you have access to variables that have been declared in the function, correct? Right? Now, that's okay, right, if you're inside of a function and whatnot, and all these things are local variables. But scopes are a little bit different, right? Especially because you can have nested views and controllers within controllers within controllers, right? So this scope inherits any variables, any functions that have been declared at controllers at a higher scope are available in this lower scope, and that becomes a problem, right? Of any variables that you might declare here, any functions you might declare here. You might be overriding something that has been declared at a higher scope. Yes? Right? So you start getting problems that, such as global variables, right? We try to avoid global variables at all costs, right? We always try to control our scopes so that it's very explicitly what is declared at each scope. Make sense? So we want to do the same thing here. So we're no longer going to use the scope variable here, okay? Because it has that problem. Right, that we don't have exactly control over what is being declared at that scope by higher scopes. Yes? So we're not going to use it anymore. No scope. Right? Instead, we're going to use another technique, right? That we are going to bind all our variables and all our functions. Instead, we're going to bind it to the instance of the controller. Right? So the controller, as it's instantiated, you have access to a reference to that instance. So this is being treated as a constructor, yes, and it gets instantiated, and you have a reference to that object that's being instantiated, yes, right? So we're going to tie this to a local variable model, right? And then just to give it a meaningful name, all right? What is our intent here? We're going to tie all the information and functions and behavior, right, with the instance of that controller, right? So that's going to allow us to use the name of the controller or some well-known name of the controller, and then namespace all our variables, right? It'll be all against the instance of that controller. So anywhere where you see scope, we're going to tie it to the instance of the controller. See that? Everybody okay? So all these variables, the message variable and this function, right? This function is tied to the instance over here of this object that we're instantiating. Yes? Right, this is being treated as a constructor. Right? So now we go back to the login page and we refresh. Right? Notice that nothing works anymore. Right? Because the view still thinks that those functions and those variables are in the scope, and they're no longer in the scope. All right, so none of this works anymore. Okay? All right, so let's fix it. Let's fix it. So the way we would fix it is that we need to go back to the template, back to the login template, and why is WebStorm always closing all my... let's see, user, template, right? And we have to tell it, hey, these variables, the message variable and that login function is no longer tied to that scope. So you're not going to find it there, right? It's tied to the instance of the controller. And for the controller to know, for the templates to know, well, where is this controller? Give it to me, right? Give me this instance of a controller. To do that, we can configure the here we can say, hey, that controller, that instance of the controller, you can refer to it. Hey, template, you can refer to the instance of the controller with the following identifier. You can say, refer to the controller instance using this identifier. And you can choose whatever identifier you want. Right? A very common identifier is to use the keyword VM, as in view model. Right? A really tiny model. Right? A model that only the template cares about. Right? It's not the big M model. Right? It's only a subset of the data that this template needs for rendering. Yes? Okay? So now the template can refer to the instance of the controller by using this keyword. So let's go back to the login, and if I want to refer to the login function that is declared on the instance of the controller, I can say vm.login. Okay? And that message is a variable that is declared on the instance of the controller, which I can refer to it as VM. Everybody okay? This makes it very, very explicit who owns this. Who owns this variable? Who owns that function? Yes?
We could read VM for all of the
Ideally, you would have a unique identifier for each controller. A unique name, right? Otherwise, you would run into the same issue, right? Of having all the controllers named the same and then say, well, which controller do you mean, right? But that's a very common name, right? If it's a generic name, right? Or some folks, just to keep it straight, they would use VM, the same exact name that they declared it in the controller. That's another popular way of doing it. But if we go back and we do a login, it doesn't work. Wait, what? Why are you not working? VM, controller, VM. And model this, model.login, model message. Model, var model, login controller, this, login, model.message. And we have here VM, VM login, username. Username, password, no. It shouldn't. What did I break? Okay, that works. Oh, that works. Okay. Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes, you are correct. Here, yes, it was working, except that I had forgotten this right here. Thank you. Was it? Thank you. Yes. Yep. So this is showing. Let's refresh and do a login. Yeah, it's still working, right? And this, if I say Bob and Bob, login, it navigates to the profile page. Yes.
So you're saying you should make the controller as like the name, so you shouldn't use VM for every single controller.
Right. It should be a unique identifier.
But then wouldn't that tie it to the view? So the view has to. So then if you change it in that one place, you have to change it in your template as well.
Right. It would be based on a well-known name for the controller.
Yeah, but then if you change, like, wasn't
You could but you could have two controllers, two completely different controllers, use the same name.
Oh,
so you can have the controller as be VM for everything.
I'm sorry.
Like what like he was asking, what I'm asking is like the controller as line, like, can you just make that VM for every single?
Yes, you can.
Okay, yeah, that's what we're asking. We weren't
Oh, I'm
asking the
sorry.
actual name of the controller. We're asking like that one.
Oh, no, yeah, they could all be the same. Yes, they could all be the same. And you can choose a name, right? And you can have like 2 instances for the same template having the same name, and the view would not know which controller it is. Yep. Yep. Okay. So there we go. So we have that working. All right, so let's stop this for a second.